Hello subscribers and non-subscribers, and welcome back to ChäoS. Let's go ahead and load up the last save. Not sure, that probably got read last time, but go ahead and do that anyway, just on the off chance that it wasn't actually read last time. After praying to the heavens unbeknownst to anyone, I stormed into the store. I kept my eyes peeled and searched the doujinshi corner. I made countless round trips and looked again and again just in case. But I couldn't find it. So disappointing. Maybe it had already sold out. I mindlessly surveyed the register. The cashier was a girl. She wasn't that cute, but she seemed friendly enough. I never used a super high-level technique like asking a clerk if a product was in stock. Not even once. The reason, of course, was because I didn't have the guts to. Not to mention the fact that Azuma Matasema's new work was entitled Sarah Goes Wild with Cosplay. Totally impossible. Excuse me, do you have Sarah Goes Wild with Cosplay by Azuma Matasema? If I asked a female clerk something like that, no matter how I look at it, you're a perv. Thank you very much for coming. In the end, I quickly gave up on asking the clerk and left the store in dejection. Or maybe I'd go to At Cafe. As I walked on, a familiar sword grazed the edge of my field of vision, and I forgot to set a timer. Let me go ahead and do that. So, one moment. 30 minutes. And start. With a unique shape and a forked blade, it was the one girl bee, Senna, she called herself, had been walking around with before. In the midst of the crowded shopping district, I saw the tip of that sword stick out above the heads of the people going along the street. Because she was coming this way, I hastily retreated into a nearby arcade. When I hid away in the shadows and peeped out to see what was happening, Senna herself soon appeared with her sword resting on her shoulder. Wearing the same frightening face as ever, she swiftly made for the station. Whatever the case, she didn't seem to have noticed I was there. Even so, I had to admire how unapologetically she walked around, because I'd also undergone the humiliation of going around with a D-sword in hand. Wasn't she mortified to be carrying such a huge sword? Rather, the police must have taken her in for questioning at least once, no doubt about it. As I continued on that train of thought, Senna's form went steadily into the distance. Where did they sell badass D-swords like the one she had? Personally, I wasn't that satisfied with the one I'd acquired, which didn't have a cool shape or radiant light. Senna's sword, in comparison, demonstrated fascinatingly good design sense. I had gotten my hands on a D-sword in hopes of using it as a kind of protective charm. At the time, trembling in fear, I had sought a means of support for my heart. I was a little more stable now after the stuff with Rimi, but despite that, the situation surrounding me hadn't undergone much improvement. I still had many enemies, like Shogun and Yua. It was precisely because of this that I possessed the desire to obtain a much stronger-looking D-sword. Of course, it was also due in part to my collector's mentality as an otaku, but drawn along by the sight of Senna's D-sword, I floated all the way over to the pedestrian scramble before I realized what I was doing. Crap, I thought, biting my lip. I hadn't wanted to come to the plaza. I reluctantly went to the shopping district and school because I had things to accomplish there, but insofar as it was possible, I wanted to avoid going near them. And one second, I want to make sure that I actually have started recording. So, one moment. Okay, and it is. When there were tons of people I didn't know surrounding or standing around me like this, it gave me the hallucination that all of my escape routes had been stolen, and it became hard for me to keep breathing. As expected, the station plaza was full of people today as well. Feeling sicker and sicker, I hunched over for a little while, holding in my nausea. Because of that, the next time I raised my face, I'd lost sight of that eye-catching D-sword. It looked as though she had walked in the direction of the Hachiko statue, but... Right then, the lights of the scramble crossing turned green. Huge numbers of people rushed into the crossing in all directions. It became a little chaotic. I thought it was kind of amazing that all of these people could go in whichever direction they wanted without bumping into each other. Seeing this, I became well aware of how unrealistic my delusion of the empty pedestrian scramble had been, the one from 2 days ago. It might be the case that over the course of a whole year, there wasn't 1 second of time when the place became vacant. Besides, what had I intended to accomplish by chasing after Senna? I couldn't do so much as ask a manga doraka clerk about whether a product was in stock, much less start up a conversation with that unsociable and scary-looking Senna. Besides, she might be my enemy. I had no idea what could end up happening to me if I merely trailed after someone like her, defenseless. What was wrong with me? I'd better go back. When, having come to that decision, I started to turn on my heel, I noticed the white chain lying on the pavement. Plus, though other people's legs concealed the place it led to, it seemed to extend from almost exactly where I was standing to the opposite side of the pedestrian scramble. What could it be? It was a remarkably long chain. Was it being used in some kind of construction? But I couldn't detect any other traces of construction work. I didn't think they'd just leave this one chain lying around. A prop from a location shoot for a movie or TV drama? No, they couldn't use it for that at a time when there were so many people here. If so, had someone thrown it away? A chain that is so long? It'd be hard enough to simply bring it here. Whatever the answer, it was definitely going to impede the progress of cars and pedestrians. I craned my neck to see how those around me were reacting. I thought it'd be dangerous if someone happened to trip over it, but I didn't see a single person paying the slightest attention to it. Maybe my eyes were playing a trick on me, I figured, so I rubbed them before squinting at it anew, but the chain was lying there as I thought before. Also, it was too eerie for me to work up the courage to touch it. Rather than being cheapish looking and made from plastic, it was a very sturdy looking metal type. I wondered how long it had been left alone here. If things were the same as usual, I would have thought of this as being some form of trap. I would have fled in fear at the thought that maybe, at the end of the chain, something horrifying was lying in wait for me. But for some reason, my current self was helplessly interested in where the chain led, in what it was connected to. My heart was controlled by the mysterious illusion that I needed to trace my way along it. Jostling against passerbys again and again, I crossed the pedestrian scramble before the signal turned red. The chain continued toward an old, deep green streetcar that had been set a little to the side of the Hachiko statue. I called it a streetcar because its wheels had been removed. It was actually closer to a kind of monument or exhibition. It should be possible to freely enter it. As I'd guessed, the white chain went up to the streetcar's open door and extended inside its compartment. There were many people waiting around by Hachiko, but not one of them paid any heed to the chain. They didn't show the faintest indication of noticing it. Besides, I didn't sense anyone's presence inside the streetcar. I swallowed anxiously and took a peek inside. That instant, I came to the understanding that this had been a trap. I couldn't believe myself for not having felt the least bit of doubt up until now. There was a single figure within the empty seeming compartment. Aoi Senna sat cross-legged on one of the streetcar's wine-colored seats. Her sharp gaze captured me firmly. In her hand, she was holding a popsicle. The blue popsicle was crunchy, wasn't it? No, crunchy didn't matter in the slightest right now. More importantly, I found it strange that I couldn't spot her giant D-sword anywhere. Where had she managed to stow away something so big? In place of her sword, the white chain lay coiled at her feet. I think we did green last time, so we're gonna go red. I'm basically just gonna alternate between those two. We'll see what sort of ending we get by alternating between those. Come to think of it, when I last met her in the shopping district, she'd said, "I'll be in the streetcar near the station," so this is where she'd meant. She was the one who'd left the chain there. Had she really walked about holding such an incredibly long chain? It looked like it could weigh well over 10 kilograms. Lengthwise, it must have surpassed 50 meters. This girl was pretty hard to get a handle on. She wasn't normal. Could she be Shogun? Frightened, I attempted to make a silent escape. A sharper voice came flying after me.
Hi.
I stopped in place without thinking. What would I do? If she attacked me with her D-sword right now, at this very moment. When I thought such things, I became unbearably frightened. I seemed to be on the verge of losing to my intimidation and obeying Senna's command. I took one step into the streetcar, but I soon had second thoughts. I was doing exactly as she wanted, like a moth to the flame, like a fly tangled in a spider's web. This was no good. What did I mean to do by going to my death of my own accord? I should run away. It would be best to run away. As was evident from seeing that chain, this girl was the possessor of unbelievable strength. Merely by twisting my arm a little bit, she'd forced me to the ground with ease, and break my arm without a moment's hesitation. But she wouldn't stop there. She also owned a D-sword. If she slashed at me with a sword that colossal and hefty, I'd die instantaneously. She had been lying in wait for me here. She was scheming something. Run away. Run right now. I spun on my heels to go back outside. At some point, the door at the entrance had closed. I'd come in through it a mere instant ago. Only a few seconds had passed since then, yet soundlessly, undetectably, even pitilessly, the door had shut. I stood riveted in place. I couldn't comprehend what had happened right away. When had this door closed? Who had closed it? I didn't think it was the kind to open and shut automatically. Besides, even automatic doors make some kind of noise when they close. Senna still settled down in her seat, didn't budge an inch. Which meant she wasn't the one who had closed it. Naturally, I hadn't closed it either. My hands hadn't so much as touched it. I thought, well, maybe this streetcar's custodian was somewhere nearby, but I didn't spot anyone of the sort outside the window. No, at this point it didn't matter who had closed it. I shifted my line of sight to the other door at the back of the compartment. That door, too, was closed. I was trapped. Senna and I were the only ones in here. What did that signify? A whole range of negative fantasies swirled around in my head until I was on the brink of screaming. Still glaring at me, Senna spoke again. I had nowhere to run. My legs were shaking. If I made a scene, the people outside might notice, but Senna would surely beat me to a pulp before I could get away. For the time being, it would be best to do as she said without resisting. I resigned myself and went to stand before her. I suddenly noticed. The bundled up chain that had been piled at Senna's feet up until hardly a second ago had completely vanished. I figured she must have moved it somewhere, but I hadn't heard any noise, and Senna was still sitting down in the same place. For starters, where would she be able to move it? I didn't spot the chain anywhere in the compartment. Utterly disregarding my confusion, Senna asked me another incomprehensible question. When I shook my head, baffled, Senna's expression became even harsher. At last, averting her eyes from me, she let out a small sigh and bit into her popsicle. Released from her gaze, which had given me the impression that she just might be capable of murder, I felt like I was able to flop down in place, or I was about to flop down in place. If possible, I'd have preferred to sit in one of these seats, but when I thought about whether she might pick a bone with me if I did, I found myself unable to act on what I wanted. Senna cast a brief look at me before jerking her chain at the view beyond the window. Or jerking her chin, not chain. I don't know why I said chain. Outside the window. People. Tons of people. I had the sense that they'd multiplied compared to before. Merely looking at them made my head threaten to start aching. People hunched over, fiddling with their cell phones, people wearing smiles as they talked on the phone, people gazing blankly at the flow of the crowd. Most of the... Okay, I guess that should just be... Most of those I could see from the window were standing still, since they were waiting to meet with someone or other. Also, with all these people around, how come none of them found it weird that Senna and I were shut up in this streetcar? None of them even paid any heed to the streetcar itself. What kind of self-important, rebellious, adolescent-type worldview was that? I often had similar thoughts. I didn't mean to say that a rebellious adolescent worldview was necessarily bad in and of itself. After all, the world was overflowing with novels and movies and anime with those kinds of settings. Why did people approve of the childishly grand settings that novelists and movie directors come up with, and then mock amateurs like me for coming up with the same kind of settings as some place? Thanks, he's world-wise middle schooler. Try thinking about it a little harder. The high and mighty people of the world clearly have the mentalities of rebellious and self-centered adolescents. Over 100 years ago, the Wright brothers had seriously believed we can fly in the sky. Napoleon boasted, the word impossible is not in my dictionary. That's why you shouldn't make fools out of those kinds of absurdly big-thinking people. All the powers that be have followed that same path. Except, the problem was, why had this girl abruptly started revealing her sweeping, philosophical, and ever so typically teenage thoughts to me? Unless you're blind, then you don't get 80% of the information coming from your vision. I thought absent-mindedly that it was similar to a telephone. Telephones convert one's voice to electric signals and carry that information to distant places. She's reading our mind. She'd read my mind? No, that was outside the realm of possibility. Had I once again been muttering to myself without knowing it? Not really. Too damn expensive. Costs, what, $600 or something for the Vive? Or is that the Oculus? And I don't know what. I think it's like $600 and $800 or something like that for the two of them. I don't know. I don't recall off the top of my head which is which. On top of that, you need a fairly beefy CPU and GPU. So no, I'm not really familiar with it. Because, yeah, as I said, too expensive. Virtual reality? Of course, I didn't actually put my answer into words. Oh. Okay. Never mind then. I don't know how... That might be even more expensive. Huh? I've been wrong. I'd never heard of that before. Neither have I, but I'm going to assume it's probably a shit ton more expensive than any attempts at VR. Physiological psychologists. That, to me, that almost sounds like it's redundant. But okay, sure. Okay, fairly certain that is indeed a thing. Not sure how far the technology's gotten. But yes, I do believe it is actually a thing. A patent? Are you serious? I thought her fantasy was rather well developed, right down to the delicate little details, but didn't saying it had been patented introduce some impossibilities? Senna, who had been looking out the window the whole time, turned back in my direction. She slowly recrossed her legs. Why, it kind of sounds like there was an echo there. Though Shibuya Station was right there before my eyes, the inside of the streetcar was peculiarly quiet. It felt as if all sound were being blocked out. It was an illusion, of course, but I couldn't help remembering my delusion of an empty Shibuya from several days earlier, and I couldn't take my eyes off the crowd moving outside the window. This girl. She dumbfounded me. She was far, far more delusional than the likes of me or Yua. What she said sounded kind of logical, but wasn't it obviously made up? And you got that information how exactly? How much of what she was saying was real? Looking down, Senna clenched the hand she left resting upon her knee. When her accusations ended, she stuck the last fragment of her melting crunchy in her mouth and abruptly rose to her feet. I unthinkingly scooted back, but the wall was close behind me. I'm pretty sure the saying is actually ignorance is bliss, though of course they're trying to be a little different there by saying that it is essentially bad to be ignorant of anything. She turned in my direction. I started to cover my face with my arms, thinking she'd hit me, but Senna slipped past my side without doing anything. Muttering that without looking at me, right as she was on the verge of passing me, she vanished from the train on her own. The door at the entrance had opened silently, without me realizing it, the same way as the moment it closed. I felt as though I had been deceived by some trickster spirit. Through the window, I dazedly watched Senna from behind as she left. She swiftly vanished into the waves of people without turning around even once. In the end, I hadn't been able to understand what she was trying to say. The most I could grasp was that she hated the world. Indeed, it was an archetypal form of adolescent rebellion. And maybe it's just me and the fact that it's such a blurred image, but it kind of looks like they're holding hands. This older guy here, and then I guess middle, maybe high schooler. But yeah, it could just be because of the image being as blurred as it is. From my point of view, it was a nuisance to have her unilaterally expel her twisted tinfoil hat theories at me. With her tone being what it was, it felt like it was a lecture. That manner of speech would be viable as a moe element in the second dimension, but all it did in real life was emphasize that no good, delinquent air of hers. But I was relieved she hadn't attacked me. Somehow, something about her gave me the sense that she was likely to go around beating up anyone, that she was likely to go around beating up people without caring who they were. And I don't know why I struggled reading that. Wanting to take a breather, I settled down into the seat that Senna had occupied earlier. Immediately after, a delinquent-looking couple abruptly entered the compartment. And after them followed a trio of obviously delinquent Kogals, and then an aging older man, and even a younger suit-wearing salaryman. In practically an instant, the streetcar became cramped. What was this all of a sudden? No one had attempted to enter before Senna left? The delinquent couple and the Kogals were too busy for me, or too noisy for me, and I got out of there in a hurry, repeatedly hissing "die" in my head. Okay, I'm actually going to end the episode here because I've only got about 3 minutes left on the timer, and I think this might be an interesting stopping point for this episode. So, yeah, that's going to be it for this episode. As always, like, for comment, subscribe, share, and I will see you guys next time. But until then, goodbye and farewell.